Hello, I'm Sarah. During the Philippine-American War, the Filipinos used guerrilla tactics against the American colonial government. The U.S. military obviously had stronger armed forces, but they needed something else to win the war. They used civil services to gain the support of the population, a critical objective of a successful counterinsurgency campaign. One civil service program that contributed successfully during the war was education. Initially, the military leadership used education to pacify the population. Later, it was used by the civilian leadership to help Filipinos towards self-governance and economic prosperity. When the U.S. first established its education system in the Philippines, the only schools that were organized were for primary education with a focus on the English language. As the system grew, vocational training, secondary schooling and universities were added. This had a positive impact on the population. Through this particular civil service, Filipinos were able to learn a trade and send their children to school. English was the primary subject required to be taught in the school system and eventually became one of the official languages of the country. The U.S. Army set up their first school for children on the island of Corregidor after the defeat of the Spanish. Effectively, the U.S. Army traded the image of a violent or threatening figure for a paternal one. The first military governor of the Philippines, Major General Wesley Merritt, promised complete protection of all educational institutions. Education changed significantly under the U.S. regime. Set by policymakers, the cornerstone of the curriculum was to use English as the medium of instruction. The first educators were American enlisted soldiers while officers became superintendents. The school system was supervised by military chaplains. As the public school system expanded in the Philippines, supplies, finances, and a number of teachers were needed. The limited amount of teachers from the Army and Filipinos who could speak English were not enough to fulfill the demand from the areas controlled by the U.S. To address the needs for teachers, teachers were imported from the U.S. Hired and having received teaching appointments from the U.S. Civil Service Commission, American teachers arrived in Manila on the United States Army Transport Thomas in August 1901. This batch of teachers was known as the Thomasites, named after the ship. The first group was about 600 people. Thomasites became synonymous with the waves of American teachers that followed. Other American teachers were family members of Thomasites who stayed after the death of their spouse and were hired as teachers. Some were soldiers serving in the Philippines. When their service was completed, they stayed in Manila to become teachers or school administrators. American teachers left a legacy in the Philippines. The system was built on solid academics. Many of the improvements were accomplished at the personal level. Dr. David P. Barrows, superintendent of schools in Manila, advocated for education to be a pathway towards a profession other than just employment. He also established a test-based scholarship system for Filipinos to study in the U.S. and return to the Philippines to assume teaching duties. This program was known as the Pensionados Program. The pensionados would eventually lead the way to solve the teacher shortage and replace American teachers within the school system. In summary, education contributed to America's counterinsurgency efforts during the Philippine-American War. Education was used to discourage Filipinos from taking up arms against the colonial government. Be that as it may, it must not be forgotten that the education system set up by the Americans was originally a pacification measure that promotes the transmission of certain ideology, set of values, outlook, attitudes, and the like from the colonizers to the colonized. Education was part of the colonial mandate, so much so that Military Governor General Arthur MacArthur stated that, "The matter is so closely allied to the exercise of military force in these islands that in my annual report I treated the matter as a military subject." Filipinos supported the colonial government by working as civil servants. They used education as a gateway to study and pass the civil servant examinations. They participated in the Pensionados program that professionalized the Filipino Corps of Teachers. They eventually took the mantle of leadership within the education system of the Philippines. That is all. Thank you for watching.